The massive alien ships appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system like dark mountains floating in space. 12 enormous vessels moved in perfect formation, each one bigger than anything humans had ever built. Their hulls were black as night, and covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with an evil light. These were the ships of the Hegemony, the galactic empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. Admiral Zexthara stood on the bridge of the lead ship, the Eternal Dominion. His tall, thin body was covered in dark scales, and his forearms moved with practiced grace as he prepared for another easy conquest. Behind him, dozens of alien crew members worked at their stations, all confident that this would be just another routine victory. The Hegemony had done this so many times before that it had become almost boring. "Begin the intimidation sequence," Admiral Zexthara commanded in his deep, rumbling voice. The alien ships spread out into an attack formation that had struck fear into the hearts of countless species. Energy weapons powered up with a menacing hum, and the ship's armor plating shifted to reveal rows of devastating cannons on Earth. The detection systems at the Global Defense Command picked up the alien fleet immediately. Warning sirens began to wail as technicians scrambled to analyze the massive ships approaching their world. Within minutes, the news had reached every government on the planet, and emergency meetings were called in every major capital. Captain Jake Morrison was enjoying his lunch at the space station orbiting Earth when his communication device started beeping frantically. He was a relaxed man in his 40s with graying hair and a permanent smile that suggested he found most things in life amusing rather than threatening. He commanded the UES Liberty Bell, one of Earth's newest space vessels, though it was tiny compared to the alien ships now approaching. "Captain Morrison," his communications officer called out, "we're getting a transmission from an alien fleet. They want to talk to whoever is in charge of Earth." Jake wiped his hands on his napkin and walked over to the communication station. On the screen, he could see the massive alien ships arranged in their threatening formation. Any other species in the galaxy would have immediately surrendered at this sight, but Jake just scratched his head and looked mildly interested. "Well, that's new," he said calmly. "Put them through." The screen flickered and suddenly Admiral Zexthara's imposing figure appeared. The alien's 4 eyes glowed with menace as he began the speech that had terrified entire civilizations. "Primitive beings of the third planet, I am Admiral Zexthara of the Hegemony. Your world has been chosen for conquest and absorption into our glorious empire. You will surrender immediately and prepare for occupation or face the complete destruction of your species." Jake listened to the entire speech while taking occasional sips from his coffee cup. When the alien finished, there was a long moment of silence. Finally, Jake leaned back in his chair and responded in the same tone he might use to talk to a neighbor about borrowed garden tools. "Yeah, hi there. Nice ships. We're kind of busy right now with a barbecue competition, so could you maybe circle back next Tuesday? We'll pencil you in between lunch and our afternoon nap." The alien command bridge fell completely silent. Admiral Zexthara's 4 eyes blinked in confusion as he tried to process what he had just heard. In 847 previous conquests, no species had ever responded to the intimidation speech with such casual dismissal. Most species begged for mercy or tried to negotiate terms. None had ever suggested rescheduling the conquest like it was a dentist appointment. "Did you not understand our message?" Admiral Zexthara asked, his voice rising slightly. "We are here to conquer your world. You must surrender now or be destroyed." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Oh, I understood perfectly. It's just that we've got this whole barbecue thing going on, and honestly, it's way more important than whatever you're doing. My buddy Carl has been working on his secret sauce for months, and we're not about to let some random space visitors interrupt that." The alien admiral's scales began to change color, which his species did when extremely agitated. "You dare to treat the mighty Hegemony as random space visitors? We have conquered hundreds of worlds. Our fleet could destroy your entire planet." "Look, buddy," Jake said, taking another sip of his coffee, "we've seen bigger. My neighbor Carl has a truck that's probably more intimidating than your flagship. And honestly, your whole evil empire thing is kind of outdated. Don't you guys have anything better to do? Communications Officer Lisa Grant was working at her station nearby and couldn't help but overhear the conversation. She was a young woman with short blonde hair and a habit of speaking her mind, even when it might not be appropriate. She leaned over to her microphone and added, "Oh, and your formation is off by about 3 degrees. Just thought you'd want to know." Admiral Zexthara's command staff exchanged bewildered looks. Never in their long military careers had they encountered a species that offered tactical advice to their conquerors. The admiral himself was beginning to feel something he had never experienced before during a conquest: confusion. "Are you mocking US?" the alien admiral demanded. "Not really," Jake replied honestly. "We're just not that impressed. I mean, 12 big ships is nice and all, but we've got better things to do than stand around being intimidated." "Is this going to take much longer? Because I've got a poker game at 8. The alien crew members began whispering among themselves in their native language. Words like unprecedented and impossible could be heard throughout the bridge. Some of the younger officers began checking their equipment to make sure the translation systems were working properly. "Perhaps you do not understand the gravity of your situation," Admiral Zexthara said slowly. "We represent the most powerful force in the galaxy. Resistance is futile." Jake laughed, which was apparently the wrong response because it made the alien admiral's scales turn an even deeper shade of angry purple. "Resistance? Who said anything about resistance? We're just not interested. It's like when someone tries to sell you a vacuum cleaner at the door. We're not resisting the vacuum cleaner, we just don't want one." Lisa looked up from her station again. "Plus, your ships are kind of ugly. Did you design them to look scary on purpose, or was that just an accident?" The alien admiral was now experiencing something that felt very much like a headache. Though his species did not technically get headaches. "You will regret this insolence," he said through gritted teeth. "We will demonstrate our power, and then you will beg for mercy." "Okay, sure," Jake said agreeably. "But could you keep it down? Some of us are trying to work here." The transmission ended with Admiral Zexthara staring at a blank screen, wondering if perhaps the conquest of Earth might be more complicated than he had initially thought. Admiral Zexthara paced around his command bridge like a caged animal. His forearms moved in agitated patterns as he tried to understand what had just happened. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered a species that treated the arrival of the hegemony fleet like an interruption to their lunch break. The other officers on the bridge watched nervously as their commander's scales continued to shift through various shades of purple and red. "Supreme Commander Velther must hear of this," Admiral Zexthara muttered to himself. He activated the long-range communication system and waited for the connection to reach the hegemony's central command, which was located thousands of light years away. The holographic image of Supreme Commander Velther appeared above the communication platform. He was an even more imposing figure than Admiral Zexthara, with 6 arms instead of 4 and scars covering his dark scales. His species had evolved from predators, and it showed in every movement he made. "Admiral Zexthara," the Supreme Commander's voice boomed across the bridge. "I trust the conquest of the 3rd planet is proceeding according to schedule." "There have been some unexpected complications, Supreme Commander," Admiral Zexthara said carefully. "The humans are not responding to our intimidation tactics in the usual manner." Supreme Commander Velther's 6 eyes narrowed. "Explain." "They told us to come back next Tuesday because they are having a barbecue competition," Admiral Zexthara said, feeling foolish just saying the words. "They also said my neighbor Carl has a more intimidating truck than our flagship." The Supreme Commander stared at his admiral for a long moment. "You are joking." "I am not joking, Supreme Commander." They also offered tactical advice about our formation and suggested that our ships are ugly. Supreme Commander Velther's scales began to change color just as his subordinates had. "This is impossible. No species has ever responded to the hegemony. In such a manner, you must demonstrate our power immediately. Destroy something large and visible to show them the futility of their position." Yes, Supreme Commander, Admiral Zexthara replied, relieved to finally have clear orders that made sense. The holographic image disappeared, leaving the Admiral alone with his confused crew. He turned to his weapons officer, a smaller alien, with multiple tentacles instead of arms. Target the largest asteroid near their moon. We will show these humans what happens when they insult the hegemony. The weapons officer's tentacles moved quickly across his control panel. Target acquired. Admiral, the asteroid is approximately 2 kilometers in diameter. Fire! Admiral Zexthara commanded, the Eternal Dominion's main cannon charged with a sound like thunder. A beam of pure energy shot across space and struck the asteroid, which exploded in a brilliant flash of light and debris. The blast was visible from Earth and created a spectacular light show that lasted for several minutes. Admiral Zexthara activated the communication system again, confident that this demonstration would finally bring the humans to their senses. Humans of Earth, you have just witnessed the power of the hegemony. That asteroid was destroyed by a single shot from our weakest weapon. Surrender now or face the same fate. The response came from a different human this time. Colonel Danny Sullivan appeared on the screen wearing a military uniform and eating what appeared to be a sandwich. He had short brown hair and the kind of mustache that suggested he took himself very seriously, even though his current behavior suggested otherwise. Nice light show, Colonel Sullivan said between bites of his sandwich. We did something similar. Last 4th of July, except ours had better colors and actual music. Here, let me show you how it's done. Before Admiral Zexthara could respond, the human fleet began to move. 3 small Earth ships approached a cluster of asteroids near Mars. The aliens watched in amazement as the humans destroyed 3 asteroids simultaneously while somehow creating red, white, and blue explosions in the vacuum of space. Even more. Impossibly, music began playing over the communication channels. How are they creating colored explosions in space? The weapons officer asked, his tentacles trembling with confusion. More importantly, Admiral Zexthara said slowly, how are they playing music in a vacuum? The humans had somehow managed to make their asteroid destruction look like a celebration rather than a demonstration of military power. The music was loud and patriotic, and the timing of the explosions was perfectly synchronized with the rhythm. It was both impressive and completely absurd. Colonel Sullivan finished his sandwich and wiped his hands on his uniform. Not bad for a Tuesday afternoon. We'll have to do something bigger for the weekend show. Admiral Zexthara was beginning to understand why his Supreme Commander had seemed so frustrated. You are treating this as entertainment? Well, yeah. Colonel Sullivan replied. What else would we treat it as? You blow up a rock, we blow up 3 rocks with better special effects. It's like a friendly competition. While the military officers were having their bizarre conversation, Dr. Helen Brooks was working in her laboratory on Earth. She was a xenobiologist, which meant she studied alien life forms. The appearance of the hegemony fleet was the most exciting thing that had happened in her career, and she was determined to make the most of it. Dr. Brooks was a middle-aged woman with gray hair and thick glasses who had spent her entire career studying theoretical alien life. Now she had real aliens to observe, and she was taking detailed notes about everything they did. She had been recording their communications and analyzing their behavior patterns. After watching the asteroid destruction exchange, Dr. Brooks sat down at her computer and began typing furiously. Within 2 hours, she had completed a scientific paper that she titled Initial Observations of Galactic Empire Species, Apparent Overcompensation Issues and Possible Therapeutic Interventions. The paper was 20 pages long and included detailed psychological analysis of the alien behavior. Dr. Brooks noted that the aliens seemed to have an unusual need for validation and appeared to be suffering from what she termed conquest addiction. She suggested that their aggressive behavior might be a response to deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. The paper was published online and immediately went viral across human networks. Within hours, millions of people were reading Dr. Brooks' analysis and sharing their favorite quotes on social media. The section about the aliens' obvious insecurity complex was particularly popular. as was her suggestion that they might benefit from group therapy sessions. Meanwhile, engineer Roy Chun was working on his own project in the maintenance bay of the Liberty Bell. Roy was a practical man who believed that every problem could be solved with the right combination of tools and creativity. He had been listening to the alien communications and found their dramatic speeches annoying. "These guys are way too serious," Roy muttered to himself as he worked on a small electronic device. "They need to lighten up." Roy's solution was typically human in its simplicity and effectiveness. He created a device that would automatically play Yakety sax every time the alien ships attempted to send a communication. The music would override whatever the aliens were trying to say and replace it with the cheerful, ridiculous melody of the old comedy song. When Roy activated his device, the results were immediate and hilarious. Admiral Zexthara tried to send another threatening message, but instead of his imposing voice, only silly saxophone music came through the communication channels. The effect was so absurd that even the normally serious military officers on the human ships began laughing. "This adds the appropriate dramatic weight to their threats," Roy explained to Captain Morrison when asked about the music. "Now when they try to sound scary, they just sound like a cartoon." Admiral Zexthara had no idea why his communications were being interrupted by ridiculous music, but he was beginning to suspect that conquering Earth might be more difficult than anyone had expected. Supreme Commander Velthor was not happy about the reports coming from Earth. His 6 arms moved in agitated patterns as he read Admiral Zexthara's latest communication. The humans had somehow turned their asteroid destruction into a celebration and were now playing ridiculous music whenever his ships tried to communicate. This was not going according to any plan the hegemony had ever made. "Send in the diplomatic corps," Supreme Commander Velthor ordered his aide. "If intimidation will not work, perhaps we can reason with these creatures?" The aide, a nervous alien with large eyes and trembling hands, bowed deeply. "Yes, Supreme Commander. Ambassador Thexmore is already preparing to depart for the human system." Ambassador Thexmore was considered one of the finest diplomats in the hegemony. He was tall and elegant, with smooth silver scales and a voice that could convince entire species to surrender without a single shot being fired. He had personally negotiated the surrender of 47 different worlds, and his success rate was perfect. The ambassador's ship was smaller than the military vessels, but far more luxurious. It was designed to impress other species with the wealth and power of the hegemony. Golden decorations covered every surface, and the interior was filled with priceless artifacts from conquered worlds. Most species were overwhelmed by the display of riches and power. When Ambassador Thexmore arrived at Earth, he requested a formal meeting with the human leadership. His ship transmitted the standard diplomatic protocols that had been used successfully across the galaxy for thousands of years. Every civilized species understood these protocols and responded appropriately. The humans responded by sending Ambassador Katie Walsh to meet with him. She was a woman in her 50s with short red hair and a no-nonsense attitude that came from years of dealing with difficult politicians. She had been Earth's ambassador to the United Nations before being promoted to handle interplanetary affairs. Though she had never expected to actually use those skills, Ambassador Thexmore's ship docked with the human space station, and he prepared for the meeting with his usual confidence. He wore his finest robes and carried with him the standard surrender document, a thick legal document that had been signed by every species the hegemony had ever conquered. The document was 847 pages long and written in the ancient legal language of the hegemony. The meeting room was simple compared to the elaborate chambers where Ambassador Thexmore usually conducted negotiations. The humans had provided a plain table, some chairs, and what appeared to be a coffee machine in the corner. Ambassador Thexmore found the simplicity almost insulting, but he maintained his diplomatic composure. "Greetings, Ambassador Walsh," he said in his most impressive voice. "I am Ambassador Thexmore of the hegemony. I have come to offer your species the opportunity to surrender peacefully and join our glorious empire." Ambassador Walsh looked up from the papers she was reading and smiled politely. "Nice to meet you. Would you like some coffee?" It's pretty good. Ambassador Thexmore was momentarily confused. In his experience, other species were usually trembling with fear by this point in the conversation. I do not require refreshments. I am here to discuss the terms of your surrender. Right, about that, Ambassador Walsh said, setting down her papers. I read through your surrender document and I have to say it's adorable. Did you get this template from Conquering for Dummies? Because we have some notes. Ambassador Thexmore watched in shock as Ambassador Walsh pulled out a red pen and began marking up the first page of the standard surrender document. She wrote comments in the margins like citation needed and legally questionable and have you considered therapy? What are you doing? Ambassador Thexmore asked, his silver scales beginning to change color. I'm editing your document, Ambassador Walsh replied cheerfully. There are a lot of problems with it. For example, this clause here about unconditional surrender is completely unrealistic. Nobody agrees to unconditional anything these days. It's bad business. Ambassador Thexmore had never seen anyone edit the standard surrender document before. The document was considered sacred by the hegemony, and every word had been carefully chosen by their finest legal minds. That document has been accepted by 847 different species. It is perfect as written. Oh, sweetie, Ambassador Walsh said with a sympathetic smile. Just because 847 people made a mistake doesn't mean we have to make the same mistake. Here, let me show you what a proper legal document looks like. She handed Ambassador Thexmore a thick folder filled with papers. These are our suggested amendments to your surrender document. We had our legal team look it over, and they found about 12,000 issues that need to be addressed. Ambassador Thexmore opened the folder and stared at the contents in disbelief. The humans had completely rewritten the surrender document and turned it into something that looked more like a business contract than a conquest agreement. The amendments included requirements for dental coverage, vacation time, and a customer complaint department. This is impossible, Ambassador Thexmore said, his voice rising. The hegemony does not provide dental coverage to conquered species. Well, you should, Ambassador Walsh replied. Good dental hygiene is important for morale. We also added a clause requiring you to establish a customer service department. If you're going to run an empire, you need to be responsive to your citizens' needs. Attorney General Sam Davis had been working with Ambassador Walsh on the legal response to the hegemony's surrender demand. He was a tall, thin man with gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that came from years of reading legal documents. He specialized in finding loopholes and problems in contracts, and the hegemony's surrender document was full of both. The original document is legally meaningless, Sam explained to Ambassador Thexmore. It makes demands without offering anything in return. It's like someone asking you to give them your house because they have a bigger gun. That might work in some places, but it's not legally binding. Ambassador Thexmore was beginning to understand why his military colleagues had been so frustrated with the humans. We offer you the opportunity to join our empire and benefit from our protection. Protection from what? Sam asked. You're the only ones threatening us. That's like an insurance salesman setting your house on fire and then offering to sell you fire insurance. Judge Patricia Young had been listening to the conversation from her seat at the table. She was a woman in her 60s with white hair and a patient expression that came from years of dealing with lawyers and politicians. She had been asked to observe the negotiations and provide legal advice if needed. I have an idea, Judge Young said kindly. Why don't I hold a workshop on basic legal principles? I could teach you about things like consent, mutual benefit, and how not to violate fundamental rights. It might help you understand why your current approach isn't working. Ambassador Thexmore stared at the judge in amazement. You want to teach the hegemony about law? Well, someone should, Judge Young replied. Your legal system seems to be based on the principle that might makes right, but that's not actually how law works. Law is supposed to protect people, not just give the strongest person whatever they want. The judge pulled out a small notebook and began writing. I'll prepare a curriculum covering basic legal concepts. We can start with the difference between a contract and a threat, and work our way up to more advanced topics like due process and civil rights. Ambassador Thexmore felt like he was living in a nightmare. Instead of negotiating a surrender, he was being offered legal education by the species he was supposed to be conquering. This is not how diplomatic negotiations are supposed to work. You're right, Ambassador Walsh agreed. Usually both sides have something to offer each other. But you're just demanding that we give you everything while offering nothing in return? That's not diplomacy, that's just being rude. She stood up and walked over to the coffee machine. Are you sure you don't want some coffee? This conversation is going to take a while. Ambassador Thexmore realized that he was completely out of his depth. The humans were treating the conquest of their planet like a business negotiation, and they were much better at business than the hegemony was. He had a feeling that his perfect success rate was about to come to an end. I need to consult with my superiors, he said finally. Of course, Ambassador Walsh replied. Take your time. We'll be here when you're ready to discuss this like civilized beings. As Ambassador Thexmore left the meeting room, he could hear Judge Young explaining to her colleagues how she planned to structure the legal education workshop. She was already discussing whether to provide coffee and donuts and suggesting that the aliens bring their own notepads and open minds. Ambassador Thexmore had the sinking feeling that conquering Earth was going to be much more complicated than anyone had expected. Fleet Admiral Kextar was growing tired of the reports coming from Earth. The humans had insulted their military demonstration, edited their surrender document, and offered to teach the hegemony about proper legal procedures. His patience was running out, and he decided it was time to show these arrogant creatures what real military power looked like. Fleet Admiral Kextar was different from the other hegemony officers. He was younger and more aggressive, with bright red scales and sharp claws that he kept polished to a mirror shine. He had earned his position through a series of brilliant military victories and was considered one of the finest tactical minds in the galaxy. His approach to problems was simple. If intimidation failed, use overwhelming force. I am tired of this diplomatic nonsense, Fleet Admiral Kextar announced to his staff officers. These humans need to learn respect for military superiority. I challenge them to a proper military engagement. His communications officer, a nervous alien with too many eyes, looked up from his station. Admiral, are you sure that is wise? The humans have been behaving very strangely. Exactly why we need to show them how real soldiers fight, Fleet Admiral. Kextar replied, Send them a formal challenge. Tell them we will engage in war games to demonstrate the futility of resistance. The message was transmitted to the human fleet, and the response came back within minutes. General Frank White accepted the challenge, but his reply was not what Fleet Admiral Kextar had expected. Sure, we'll play war games with you, General White said over the communication channel. But let's make it interesting. How about we add some style to this thing? General White was a man in his late 50s with gray hair and a face that suggested he had seen everything the universe could throw at him. He had been a career military officer for 30 years and had learned that sometimes the best way to win a fight was to confuse the enemy so badly that they forgot what they were fighting about. Style? Fleet Admiral Kextar repeated, not sure what the human meant. Yeah, style, General White replied. If we're going to have a military engagement, we might as well make it memorable. Trust me, you'll love what we have planned. Fleet Admiral Kextar agreed to the war games, confident that his superior training and equipment would quickly demonstrate human inferiority. He arranged his fleet in a perfect battle formation and waited for the humans to approach. What he saw next would haunt his dreams for years to come. The human ships approached the battle zone painted in the brightest neon colors imaginable. Pink, green, yellow, and orange ships moved in patterns that seemed to follow no military doctrine that Fleet Admiral Kextar had ever studied. Worse yet, they were playing music so loud that it could be heard over the communication channels. What are they doing? Fleet Admiral Kextar's weapons officer asked, staring at the approaching human fleet in amazement. I have no idea, the Admiral replied honestly. Begin the engagement. The hegemony ships moved forward in perfect formation, their weapon systems targeting the human vessels with precision and efficiency. This was how military engagements were supposed to work: organized, professional, and deadly serious. Lieutenant Commander Julie Park was piloting one of the human ships, a bright purple vessel that she had personally decorated with racing stripes and what appeared to be a cartoon character painted on the hull. She was a young woman with short black hair and an expression of constant amusement, as if she found the entire universe entertaining. "Okay, people," she announced over the communication channel, "time to show these guys the Dizzy Bee maneuver." Lieutenant Commander Park's ship began spinning rapidly while moving forward, firing its weapons in all directions as it rotated. The effect was completely chaotic and should have been completely ineffective, but somehow she managed to hit more targets than the precisely aimed hegemony weapons. How is she doing that? Fleet Admiral Kekstar demanded, watching his ships take damage from what appeared to be random gunfire. "I have no idea, sir," his tactical officer replied. "Her ship is spinning so fast that our targeting computers cannot predict where she will be next." Lieutenant Commander Park's voice came over the communication channel, cheerful and relaxed despite being in the middle of a space battle. "The secret is to confuse yourself so much that the enemy can't predict what you're going to do next. If you don't know what you're doing, how can they?" Captain Rick Johnson was commanding another human ship, this one painted bright orange with flames decorating the sides. He was a middle-aged man with a beard and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he could handle any crisis while also thinking about what to have for dinner. "Attention all ships," Captain Johnson announced. "Today's battle menu includes grilled space vegetables with a side of alien confusion. We'll be serving victory with a light sauce of bewilderment." Captain Johnson's ship was engaged in combat with 3 hegemony vessels, but instead of following normal military procedures, he was broadcasting a cooking show. His crew maintained perfect combat effectiveness while simultaneously preparing a 7-course meal in the ship's kitchen. "Now, the key to good grilled vegetables is timing," Captain Johnson explained as his ship dodged enemy fire. "You want to get them just crispy enough without burning them. Speaking of burning, fire all weapons at the ship on our starboard side." The human weapons fired with perfect accuracy, damaging the hegemony ship while Captain Johnson continued his cooking demonstration. As you can see, multitasking is essential in both cooking and space combat. "Sally, could you pass me the salt? Also, target their engine systems." Fleet Admiral Kekstar watched in horror as his perfectly organized fleet was being systematically defeated by ships that appeared to be commanded by lunatics. The humans were treating the military engagement like a combination of a party, a cooking show, and a circus performance. "This is impossible," he muttered. "How are they winning?" His tactical officer was studying the battle data with growing amazement. "Sir, they appear to be using a military doctrine based on organized chaos. Their movements are completely unpredictable, but somehow they are achieving better results than our coordinated attacks." Commander Sarah Bell was piloting a bright green ship that seemed to be dancing through the battle zone. She was a woman in her 30s with long brown hair and a smile that suggested she was having the time of her life. Her ship moved in patterns that looked more like ballet than military maneuvers. "This is fun," she announced over the communication channel. "Hey, Admiral Kekstar, you should try moving your ships to music. It really helps with the rhythm of combat." To prove her point, Commander Bell's ship began performing what could only be described as a space waltz, spinning and weaving between enemy fire while returning shots with perfect timing. Her weapons fire was synchronized to the beat of the music playing from her ship's speakers. "Are they dancing?" Fleet Admiral Kekstar's communications officer asked in disbelief. "I believe so, sir," the tactical officer replied. "And it is surprisingly effective." The human fleet was not only winning the engagement, but making it look easy. Their ships moved with a fluid grace that the rigid hegemony formations could not match. Every time the aliens tried to predict human movements, the humans would do something completely unexpected. Major Tony Rodriguez was commanding a ship painted in red and white stripes that looked like it belonged in a carnival. He was a stocky man with a mustache and the kind of laugh that could be heard across the entire ship. His approach to space combat was simple: have fun and confuse the enemy. "Attention alien fleet," Major Rodriguez announced. "You guys are taking this way too seriously. War is supposed to be fun. Watch this." His ship began performing loops and barrel rolls while firing at enemy vessels. The maneuvers served no tactical purpose except to entertain his crew and annoy the enemy. But somehow they were more effective than the hegemony's textbook military tactics. How are they doing this? Fleet Admiral Kextar demanded for the 10th time. "I think they are not following any military doctrine we understand," his weapons officer replied. "They appear to be making up their tactics as they go along." Dr. Lisa Chun was observing the battle from the command ship and taking notes for her research. She was a military psychologist who studied combat behavior, and the current engagement was providing her with more data than she had collected in her entire career. "Fascinating," she murmured as she watched the human ships dance through the battle zone. "They have turned military engagement into a form of creative expression." Number Wonder the aliens cannot predict their movements. The battle continued for 2 hours, with the human fleet steadily gaining the upper hand through a combination of superior tactics and complete unpredictability. The hegemony ships were designed for traditional military engagements, but the humans were fighting like no species the aliens had ever encountered. Finally, Fleet Admiral Kextar was forced to admit defeat. His perfectly trained fleet had been outmaneuvered by ships that appeared to be commanded by entertainers rather than soldiers. "This engagement is concluded," he announced over the communication channel. "The humans have demonstrated their military capabilities." General White's voice came back immediately, cheerful and relaxed. "Good game, Admiral. Thanks for playing with us. Your ships are pretty impressive, even if your tactics could use some work." Supreme Commander Velthor was standing in the center of the hegemony's highest council chamber, his 6 arms moving in patterns that showed extreme agitation. Around him sat the 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy, the leaders of the species that controlled thousands of star systems and billions of lives. They had been listening to reports from Earth for hours, and none of them could believe what they were hearing. "Let me understand this correctly," said Council Leader Mordaxer, ancient voice crackling with disbelief. "The humans defeated our finest fleet admiral in military exercises while cooking dinner and dancing to music." "That is correct, Council Leader," Supreme Commander Velthor replied, his scales shifting through shades of embarrassed purple. "They also offered tactical advice to our officers and suggested we should try moving our ships to music for better rhythm." The council chamber fell silent except for the quiet humming of the environmental systems. Never in the 1,000-year history of the hegemony had they encountered a species that treated their military might as entertainment. The silence stretched on until Council Leader Mordax spoke again. "Perhaps it is time to reveal the reality." "Ender," she said slowly, "if conventional conquest will not work, we must show them the true power of the hegemony." The Reality Ender was the hegemony's ultimate weapon, a massive space station capable of destroying entire planets with a single shot. It had been built over centuries using the resources of dozens of conquered worlds, and its very existence was considered the most closely guarded secret in the galaxy. The weapon had only been used 3 times in history, and each time it had convinced entire star systems to surrender without a fight. "Are you certain this is necessary?" asked Council Member Zertek, his multiple eyes blinking nervously. "The Reality Ender has never failed to achieve immediate surrender. The humans have already proven they do not respond to normal intimidation." Supreme Commander Velthor replied, "We must show them something that will finally make them understand the futility of resistance." The order was sent across space to the secret location where the Reality Ender waited. The massive weapon began its journey toward Earth, moving slowly but inevitably through the darkness between stars. Its arrival would take several days, giving the humans time to consider their position and hopefully come to their senses. When the Reality Ender finally appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system, even the humans had to admit it was impressive. The weapon was the size of a small moon, covered in armor plating and bristling with enough firepower to crack a planet in half. Energy readings from the station were off every scale that human science had developed. Supreme Commander Velthar himself traveled to Earth aboard the Reality Ender, determined to personally oversee humanity's final surrender. He activated the long-range communication system and addressed the entire planet with the full authority of his position. "Humans of Earth," his voice boomed across every communication channel on the planet, "you have ignored our warnings and insulted our power for the last time. Behind me stands the Reality Ender, a weapon capable of destroying your entire world in a single shot. You have 24 hours to surrender unconditionally, or your species will be erased from existence." The transmission ended, and Supreme Commander Velthar settled back to wait for the inevitable response. Every species that had ever seen the Reality Ender had immediately begged for mercy and agreed to any terms the hegemony demanded. He expected the humans to be no different. The response came exactly 12 minutes later, broadcast from Earth with the same casual tone the humans had used for all their previous communications. President Nancy Foster appeared on the screen, sitting behind her desk in what appeared to be a completely ordinary office. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and the kind of patient expression that came from years of dealing with difficult people. "That's cute," President Foster said, looking directly at the camera. "We built one of those last month." Johnny from engineering was bored, so we let him tinker with some spare parts. "Johnny, want to show them what you made?" The camera angle shifted to show a man in work clothes standing next to what appeared to be a coffee machine. Johnny Martinez was a stocky man with grease-stained hands and a baseball cap that he wore backwards. He was holding a sandwich in one hand and had the relaxed expression of someone who built planet-destroying weapons as a hobby. "Oh yeah, the planet cracker," Johnny said casually, taking a bite of his sandwich. "We call it the Whoopsie Daisy. It's about 12 times more powerful than theirs, but we mostly use it to clear space debris. Safety first, you know." Supreme Commander Velthar stared at the screen in complete disbelief. The human was claiming that they had built a weapon more powerful than the Reality Ender as a spare-time project, and were using it for garbage collection. "That is impossible," he said aloud, though the camera could not hear him. "The Reality Ender took centuries to build using the resources of our entire empire." Johnny apparently heard the question through some other communication channel because he nodded and continued talking. "Yeah, it only took about 3 weeks. We had some leftover parts from the Mars terraforming project and a bunch of old microwave ovens. The tricky part was getting the safety systems to work properly. We didn't want it going off by accident during lunch break." The human engineer pulled out what appeared to be a tablet computer and showed it to the camera. "Here are the technical specifications if you want to compare. Your weapon is pretty good for something built with Stone Age technology, but you might want to upgrade your power systems. We're getting about 40% more efficiency with our quantum flux capacitors." Supreme Commander Velthar felt something that might have been a mental breakdown beginning to develop. The humans were not only claiming to have superior weapons, but were offering technical advice on how to improve hegemony technology. "This cannot be real," he muttered. "They must be bluffing." President Foster heard this comment and smiled politely. "Johnny, why don't you give them a demonstration? Nothing too big, just enough to show we're not kidding." Johnny nodded and walked over to what looked like a control panel made from spare computer parts. "Sure thing, Madam President. I'll just clear out that asteroid belt that's been bothering the Jupiter shipping lanes." The humans activated their weapon, and Supreme Commander Velthar watched in horror as an entire asteroid belt simply disappeared. Not destroyed or blown apart, but completely erased from existence as if it had never been there. The energy readings from the human weapon were so high that they broke his instruments. "Nice and clean," Johnny said with satisfaction. "No debris, no radiation, no fuss. That's the beauty of proper engineering." While the military demonstration was happening, Chief Scientist Dr. Betty Adams was putting the finishing touches on her latest research paper. Dr. Adams was a small woman with wild white hair and thick glasses who had spent the last week analyzing every piece of hegemony technology she could observe. Her conclusions were not flattering. An elementary review of Galactic Empire engineering, Why Your Death Star Is, basically a microwave with delusions of grandeur, was published online within hours of the Reality Ender's arrival. The paper was 40 pages long and included detailed technical analysis, helpful suggestions for improvement, and several children's drawings that Dr. Adams had commissioned from local elementary schools. The paper quickly went viral across human networks, with millions of people sharing their favorite sections. The part where Dr. Adams compared the Reality Ender to a really big microwave that someone forgot to put a timer on was particularly popular. So was her suggestion that the aliens might want to try reading some basic engineering textbooks before building their next doomsday weapon. The children's drawings were especially insulting because they showed simple modifications that would make the hegemony weapons at least somewhat dangerous. One 8-year-old had drawn a picture showing how to add cup holders to the Reality Ender's control room, noting that even scary space weapons should be comfortable for the people who work there. Supreme Commander Velther read the entire paper through his translation system, his scales changing color rapidly as he processed each new insult. The humans had not only claimed to have superior weapons, but had published a detailed analysis explaining exactly why hegemony technology was inferior. "This is intolerable," he said to his aide. "How can a primitive species have such advanced technology?" His aide, who had been reading the human research papers, looked up nervously. "Sir, according to their scientific journals, they do not consider their technology particularly advanced. They describe most of these innovations as basic engineering and stuff we figured out in school." The final insult came when the human fleet began to withdraw from the area. Captain Jake Morrison, who had started this entire mess with his casual dismissal of the hegemony's first contact, sent one last transmission to the alien fleet. "Thanks for stopping by," he said cheerfully. "Don't forget to rate your experience on our survey. We're trying to improve our customer service scores, and feedback from Galactic Empires is always helpful." The transmission included a link to an actual customer satisfaction survey that asked questions like, "How would you rate the quality of our planet-destroying weapon demonstration?"